Welcome to the session on the prime contractor's perspective on CMMC. So the CMMC regulation marks a pivotal shift in the defense industrial base, particularly in how prime contractors select their subcontractors. With compliance flow-down requirements mandating certification across the entire supply chain, CMMC certification is likely to become a critical factor in contract awards. Primes must now carefully evaluate their suppliers' cybersecurity readiness because a non-compliant subcontractor could jeopardize contract opportunities. Today's session at our annual CMMC Summit, hosted with AWS, explores how prime contractors view cybersecurity compliance and how they'll manage flow-down requirements in this evolving CMMC landscape. With insights from the front line of modern warfare to the boardrooms of major defense contractors, our speakers will share perspectives on both tactical compliance and strategic security imperatives. We are fortunate to be joined by CISOs from two of the largest prime contractors in the world. Mr. J.R. Williamson serves as Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Leidos, where he oversees all aspects of information security strategy, governance, risk, and cybersecurity operations. JR is a defense industry veteran. He previously held executive positions at Northrop, including corporate CIO and deputy CISO. JR also holds a master's in information systems from Virginia Tech and a bachelor's degree in decision sciences from George Mason University. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Douglas Bruns. Doug serves as VP of Information Security and Chief Information Security Officer at a large international prime, BAE Systems. Previously, he held cyber intrusion prevention at the Department of Homeland Security. Doug holds a bachelor's degree in information systems from Strayer and maintains elite industry certifications, including CISSP and CISM. And finally, I am delighted to welcome JC Dodson, who brings extensive international expertise in cyber strategy and operational design as a partner at Cyber Activities Group, and drawing over 20 years of executive experience at BAE Systems, where he served as Chief Security Officer and Global CISO, and his distinguished military career as a U.S. Air Force colonel. He now advises global organizations on risk mitigation strategies through his firm, J. Carl Group. And what is truly fascinating is that he has just returned from the front lines of the Ukraine-Russia war, and we are interested in hearing his insights on what he learned about cybersecurity based on his time on the front lines. So let's welcome you all and get into this important topic. So the first question goes to the CISOs in this group here. JR, how does your role as a CISO at a major prime evolve with the emerging compliance requirements?
Yes, so thank you for having me. Very glad to be here. And I'd say that the role of the CISO has really sort of changed a little bit. It's expanding, if you will, where, in the past, we were generally accountable more internally, for IT operations and cyber compliance and cyber risk for the corporation. And I think what's been changing as the level of threat has increased on our supply chain, as we all do a little better at managing our infrastructures, the adversaries are turning into our supply chain to penetrate and to have long-term persistence. And so what's happening now is our remit is expanding into those supply chains. And so now I think you're finding is very common and very typical for large primes to be accountable now as a CISO for all of that. In fact, anything in my remit, anything associated with Leidos's brand, I have cybersecurity risk management accountability for. And so that's in all areas, both in terms of what we do across the corporation, but also deep into our program areas. And I think that's what's changed. You know, the complexity, the volume, the veracity of the risk now shifting in there. You know, our folks have an understanding of how those things work. We partner together very closely with these suppliers in order to be successful on delivering our mission. I mean, ultimately, none of us can do it by ourselves. None of us is as smart as all of us. And so coming together here very effectively across the entire program performance area is how we get to success.
So the next question goes to Doug and to you again, JR. And since this is a CMMC summit, the first question that people would like to ask, are you taking the CMMC thing seriously? So specifically, what strategies are you implementing, if any, to prepare your organizations for CMMC third-party assessments?
Yeah, so I'll start. And again, thank you for having me. And you know, we've done a lot. And are we taking it seriously? Absolutely. We spend a large majority of time and energy across the organization, making sure that we are prepared and ready for those audits. And so one of the strategies that we've taken is to really look at multiple parts of our organization having different responsibilities. It checks and balances systems. So we have an assurance team that makes sure that we are ready, prepped for the audits, that goes around doing mock audits and assessments. We have a governance team that is helping to drive the implementation of controls. We've implemented things like design authority reviews so that if you did have a finding, that you would be able to go to a team and be able to close that finding, knowing that you've done the right level of effort from a technical and documentation standpoint. So really, by setting up all these checks and balances, you create a system of compliance where there really is no escapes, right, in the process. That is something that the primes can do. We realize that that's a lot harder as you go into the supply chain, right? We're big organizations. We can pull those things together. And so we always look at how can we drive something similar in terms of efficiency, governance, checks and balances for supply chain. How do we make that easier?
JR, how about Leidos? Are you responsible for your CMMC certification at Leidos?
I am, yes. And look, you know, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance and people, projects, and process. I'll throw a few more P's out there. But at the end of the day, getting ahead of this, you always talk about the threat and getting left of boom or left of theft. Similar here on the compliance regimes, you need to get up ahead of these things. And so, as Doug mentioned, you know, partnering with the other functional teams and organizations is essential. We can't do this just by themselves. And although I wear the accountability for that compliance for the corporation, it takes a village to achieve it and then sustain it over time. So knowing this and you know, being a part of the leadership team helping to develop this program across all of government, you know, we've been ahead of this curve. And so we've certified already. We did a joint surveillance engagement with DoD and the DIPCAC, as well as our third-party assessor who came in. We did that, you know, over 2 years ago. And put that into place. And in fact, we're actually a little bit of danger because that's going to expire, you know, here in November of next year. So we'll have to keep that going. So according to the regulatory rule, once everything becomes final here in December, then, you know, we are certified. You know, so what we've already done will actually convert, you know, to a certification. So the good news is, I think for Leidos, we're there. We're prepared. We put the right processes in place, like Doug mentioned, to sustain this and kind of build a culture, you know, of how we will, you know, maintain this capability and risk management posture over time. And now our attention for the last year, trying to get ahead of this, has really been on our really key partners and our really key suppliers and helping them get where they need to be, because again, we can't do it by ourselves. You know, we're a prime contractor, but we're not the only contractor. And everyone who is going to be storing, processing, or transiting CUI must be appropriately certified under CMMC, once these things get applied to contracts, late in 25 and into 26. So a lot of our attention and focus is now in helping those critical suppliers to our supply chain get where they need to be too.
So I think that's good that we have established the foundation that the primes themselves are taking it seriously. In fact, several of you are now already compliant. And now let's move down to the supply chain, which I think you already started alluding to, JR. So how are you evaluating and ensuring subcontractor compliance, and how does the cybersecurity readiness from a perspective of compliance affect your vendor selection process?
Well, and I'll start. I'd say two things, maybe 10. One is that the good news about CMMC, even though I really believe we should just change it. I mean, it's cybersecurity maturity model certification. It should probably just be adjusted to the cybersecurity compliance certification, because the maturity part of this we sort of taken out in order to make this easier for the whole DIB and across the whole supply chain to be able to actually implement this kind of program effectively. But it is my hope over time that we'll kind of get back to maturity. We'll sort of check these boxes on hitting these baselines that are necessary to ensure that we've got the compliance we want. But compliance does not always equal safety. And so ultimately, it's our hope to be able to elevate, that and actually get back to the conversation of maturity over time. But how do we do that? I mean, the good news is the rules are very clear. The DFARS requirement under 7012 is the same. So that hasn't changed. We've uplifted, 800-171 a couple of times. There's a new version of it out there now, but that's not going to be applied to the law in the beginning of this journey. So again, we have real crystal clear view on what the compliance is, and so evaluating a supplier's performance against that is pretty straightforward, particularly since they already have a requirement, to enter and self-assess. Enter into SPURS and self-assess on their score. So working that with them is important, but it doesn't end there. It starts there, but it's really about partnering now. And so there's a lot of hugging going on to help folks get there, because again, we can't be successful without our supply base working with us here. Some of that hugging might get a little bit assertive. There might be a little bit of bruising left behind. But the intent is to help and to get there and to help folks with whatever technical support they need, advice and coaching that we can provide, insights in terms of high risk areas, and back to sort of that lead tracking system. What are the major programs that are likely to be impacted in the earlier days and get applied CMMC certification requirement, and making sure that we tune our attention, put our time, talent, and treasure on those areas of highest risk and ensure that we're prepared to deal with that.
So I want to dive in a little bit deeper with you, JR, and with Doug as well. So under DFARS, I mean, you had flow down requirements and you were asking the subcontractors to be compliant, but CMMC is a whole different game. So what are the changes that you're seeing in your own behaviors vis-a-vis the suppliers when it now comes to the CMMC era compared to the DFARS era, which was largely self-certification? So perhaps let's start with you, Doug. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So I think what we've seen is that the DIB primes have a body of knowledge over the past couple of years in getting ready, right? So not just for DFARS, but then going into CMMC. So it's all the prep work, all the understanding, everything that we've done is a huge body of knowledge. And so taking that and helping the supply chain understand how to work through those things, right? If you look at a path to compliance, right? What does it take to go from DFARS to CMMC? We've done that, all right? We know where the hurdles are. We know where the major issues can come up with an organization. Is it documentation? Is it understanding where your CUI is, right? These are things that we've faced and we've conquered. And so I think those lessons are really important to share, right? And those can be relatively simple, but very impactful when you talk to a supplier that is going through this process of how do you get from DFARS to CMMC? What does that mean, right? It can be confusing. It can be a lot. But if you can help really boil it down into the pieces and the major steps that you have to go through, it makes a world of difference.
So, JR, maybe I'll ask the question is in a very helpful answer from Doug, but a slightly different take from you, which is in the DFARS era. Let's say I was a supplier of yours, and I did what I did with adequately in my judgment for DFARS. But now, when you start preparing for contracts that have CMMC, just a good enough effort from me as a supplier is probably not going to cut it. So how are you going to change how you look at your suppliers in the CMMC era compared to the DFARS era?
Yeah, and back to the sort of this partnership with the functions, within the organization. That's why it's not just a information security or a cybersecurity thing. So this is swimming upstream with our capture teams and business development, because it's really important that they understand they just can't pick, the best solution or best partner here because I'm getting my best margin return, or they have product or capacity to be able to deal with it. Now they also have to bring forward this sort of representation of compliance. And that's really what the government's asking us to do as Div Primes, is to ensure that the entire team that we're bringing, anyone again who is storing, processing, or transiting CUI, that whole team has been proven, and the way it's proven through a verification and validation phase is the CMMC process itself. So it's still the same requirements. For level 1 and level 2, the requirements are still the same that they were under DFARS. So that part hasn't really changed. What's different is now there's a verification and validation process, by a third party. And there is a scenario under level 2 still within the proposed rulemaking where you can self-assess, for certain types of lower risk level 2. My opinion is the probability of that being sort of enforced that way is pretty low. I think you're going to see most of the program areas where a level 2 certification is going to be required are going to be significant enough that they're going to want an actual certification. And so we'll sort of, evaluate that over time. But now we have to work with the capture teams to say that as you're looking at this list of potential suppliers, past performances, things that we've worked with before, you're now adding this evaluative criteria to the selection of that supplier, and they must be certified. Now, the way the rule is going to come out, it says at a time of award. So it's not at time of submission of the proposal. So we do have some flexibility here. So that's why we're swimming upstream now with our supply base, and to say, look, let's get ready. Let's get ready, and then let's get it done. That way the certification is in place. So when we have to move quickly for a capture activity, all of those issues are solved. We can partner together, and the whole team moves forward. Because we do run the risk, to your point, Sanjeev, that we may have a really great supplier who's got a perfect solution that fits excellently into our offering to the customer, but they're not certified. And they're not going to be certified for another 12 to 14 or 15 months. And therefore, we just can't use them. And so they're off the team. They will not be part of the bid process, because we run the risk of not winning that award if they cannot be certified at the time that the award is given.
I think, JR, you have just nailed it, the essence of the argument, that it is now sort of like the SAT, where your entire team has to have the SAT. And if they haven't taken the SAT and scored, close to perfect on the SAT, they're not going to be part of your team. And so from the supplier's perspective, you've been crystal clear in saying, look, you may be really good at everything else, but if you don't have this particular element, it is seriously jeopardizing our ability to select you to be on our team.
And that's why there's so much hugging going on, because
I
we
know,
love
and
you, right? We can't be successful without these suppliers. I mean,
Yep.
and sometimes even I'm prime contractor, I'm a supplier to another prime contractor.
Yep.
And so we understand this relationship very well. And there's a lot of hugging going on to help people get there. And yeah, some might feel a little suffocated by those hugs a few times, but that's why it's so important to us.
It's better to have the slight suffocation from the JR hug right now than to be, dispatched from participating in the team. So let's move to JC and Doug. And let's start talking a little bit about international suppliers. I want to make it clearly understood. Given your global experience, and BAE is a very global company, will CMMC and DFARS impact and apply to international suppliers? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I'll start. So yes, I think we've done and seen a couple things, and we're tackling it across multiple angles, right? So one, working with governments, right? So we saw, I think last year, Canada came out and said that they would follow the CMMC standard, right? So immediately off the bat, that makes things a little bit easier when they've elected that they will follow that. In the UK, Australia, things are a little different, right? And I think the key word here is reciprocity. We're working with those governments to try to understand how we can get reciprocity for different standards so that we can move forward with contracts. And then I think the other piece is really working internally with our UK and Australia teams to see where they're at, right? And really measure up the different standards with the CMMC controls to understand those differences, right? So we can go in and be ready for those audits, be prepared. Even if the standards are different, controls can be the same and mapped across. There's still some work to be done there. It's a lot of work, but it is something in progress, and I think we've been doing a really good job over the past couple of years getting there.
I think we had clear guidance from the attorneys, including our distinguished keynote speaker this morning, Robert Metzger, that the CMMC requirements apply today to international suppliers. So those suppliers will have to comply with these requirements if they have to be part of a bid process over here. JC, you've recently returned from the Ukraine-Russia war zone. And my questions, and you can take a little bit more time on these, how has witnessing modern warfare firsthand shaped your perspective on the relationship between cybersecurity, compliance, and what lessons would defense contractors take from your experience in this ongoing major conflict?
Sure. Well, thanks. It's great to be with you all again. And just in reflecting a little bit from Doug's comments that were right on, I think the other thing that I'm finding working with international companies that have defense contracts, they are finding these new requirements embedded in their international contracts, right? So just as you would think in a U.S. contract that it's going to require to have 800-171 or CMMC, contract requirements from other countries are starting to align closely with some of those cyber requirements. So if you're in a joint program, whether it be something from the AUKUS cooperative arrangement with the US, UK, and Australia, for example, that I have some knowledge of, you're seeing these types of requirements in both the export control region, the handling of sensitive information between nations, and also the cyber requirements. So there's a confluence of all these types of requirements coming together. So again, CMMC is underpinning US contractors' ability to compete with international procurements. Regarding Ukraine and Russia conflict, I've been there a number of times. Just recently, I returned from most of the month of October. I was with them. My work there has been primarily pro bono the first part of the year. The last part of the year, I'm working with some national governments and providing analysis and research, particularly on the impact of cyber, electronic warfare, and the drone war. And there's an interesting nexus between all three of those technologies that's occurring and shaping the front. I and a colleague were embedded with special forces and special drone forces, primarily in Kharkiv and Prokop, near Chavez Yar, and all those areas are very difficult areas right now and under great contention in terms of the Russian advances and Ukraine holding positions. And what we found from that was the requirements for really rapid, innovative changes, particularly in the counter electronic warfare, counter cyber, counter drone activity. The drones are starting to change the way the war is being fought. It's a kind of a line of contact war where there's some defined boundaries. Those boundaries change based on the movement of the two forces. but the whole battle space is absolutely inundated with drones that are either providing reconnaissance and surveillance, whether that be optical or electronic surveillance, as well as now attacking drones that are down to the FPVs that you've all read about, to include now a greater use of bomber drones that have more distance, more payload, and more power in terms of delivering ordnance on top of a target. So all those things are innovating very, very quickly. So what's this mean for us in industry and for us in the government? There's currently, in my and my colleagues' view, a mismatch between military doctrine and their ability to adapt technology. The technology is changing so quickly on the front that a lot of things are happening where a product will come out to the front. It will require modification by the soldiers on the front line before it's engaged in the battle. So we're not quite there in the just in time. And those are generally in changing communications frequencies and some of the other elements that break the transmissions between the drone and the operator, trying to disrupt that capability on the drones. That's been a huge focus, and it's been used with cyber, it's been used with electronic warfare and other means. So what we're finding is that the small and mid suppliers are the ones that are becoming the most adaptive to provide that just-in-time technology or that just-in-time adjustment. So for example, a drone that's going in to create an attack on a trench position, it has a line of sight limitation. That line of sight can be interrupted by a number of means. You can go over a hill, which breaks it. So what happens? You put a drone now in the air that it relays it. If you need more range, you put another drone. So you can see how there's daisy chaining of drones. All those are dependent on communications. Those communications then can be broken by a variety of means, particularly on electronic warfare. So the changing and protection of frequencies is becoming very, very important in the drone war. And so those are the types of changes that we're seeing being adaptive primarily by small innovative contractors. There's mass production going on both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side for drones, but the real battle changers at the tactical level are in the small and mid area. And I think that translates over to a lesson out of the war in the need for us in the defense industrial base in the United States to look at a better uptake. We always talk about faster, smarter, cheaper, better, more innovation. Every contractor has their own innovation play. We are still not being fast enough. And I think what the takeaway we're going to have from the experience in the war right now, certainly my observations are going to be the need for speed and agility in those three disciplines, whether it be cyber, drones, and electronic warfare. Probably a longer answer than you wanted, but
no, this is fascinating because it leads,
are driving the show there. It is a
yeah,
small.
no, it's a fascinating answer, and it leads me to the last question, which is to Doug and JR. We heard from JC the importance of small and medium, and so in direct words from you, what guidance would you offer your small and medium subcontractors or subs to your subs regarding your expectations on when you expect them to be compliant? And are there any resources that you could offer them? 2 minutes.
Well, I'll certainly take less than 2 minutes, but I think the time is now, right? If you're not compliant and you don't have a path to get there, you're probably late. And certainly there are resources to help, right? So I think over the past couple of years, the DIP primes have worked on things like the shared assist, which are a collection of resources that you can go to on a website, right, and look at various helpful resources for CMMC and other cyber-related activities. And then also make the call, right? I think a lot of the primes are here to help, and they've got really not only the resources, but the lessons learned, right? You know, what are those major hurdles, and what is that experience like when you actually sit down and go through an assessment, right? How painful is it? What do you expect, right? And getting ready for that, and then collectively we move forward.
JR, last words from you.
I agree with all those, and I would just add that, you know, back to the timing of this, you know, the final rules out for 32, you know, CFR 48 should be done completely, and you know, by the end of the year, which means, you know, according to DoD's 4-phase sort of rollout time frame, you know, we're going to see for what I'll call early adopter programs in the late 25 timeframe. So most of this will happen in 26 and beyond over a 3-year phase-in period. But now's the time, to Doug's point. And unfortunately, this isn't something you do in a 6-week sprint. Depending on where you're at right now, this may take you quite a number of months to accomplish. We've certainly seen some of our suppliers take over a year to accomplish all of these tasks and to be able to get to a place where you can have a level 2 certification. So if you haven't really kicked this off in earnest, you need to. And work with your prime contractors. They're always happy to help. 2 of us are here right now, and guarantee you, that hugging is happening every day. But you can also reach out to other places. The National Defense ISAC is a great resource for you. There's a tremendous amount of documentation and publication of information there to help you, best practices, solutions that are easy and repeatable to put into place. There are certain cloud patterns that are available to you that might be quicker and cheaper and faster to implement in order to achieve some of these compliance requirements than having to sort of redesign or rebuild something on-prem. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the last thing I would say is that if you don't really need to handle CUI, don't. Because that's really what's triggering this next level of requirement. It's that storing, processing, or transiting of CUI. And so if that's not a requirement for you in order to provide the support necessary, under a particular contract, then don't go down there because that is what's going to drive a lot of these outcomes. But if you do believe that you're either doing that now and you're already under 7012 requirement under DFARS, then finish off those projects, get those things done. Let's get those things here quickly so that we're ready to partner together in team when we go after these new jobs where the 7021 clause is going to be applied and the CMMC certification level is going to be present.
Well, thank you very much, JR, Doug, and JC for your comprehensive insights.